The following presentation will describe setup and administration of the weekly calendar planning activity assessment tool. This module follows the Part 1 overview and introduction presentation and should be used in conjunction with the WCPA manual. Before administering the WCPA, it is important to first decide which level and version is the most appropriate for your client. Refer to pages 6 through 8 of the manual for detailed instructions on choosing the right form. The materials needed for the participant include client instructions and rules, the appointment list or paragraph, a blank weekly calendar, and weekly calendar samples. These items can be found in the appendices of the WCPA manual. Documents should be printed using a high-quality printer, and the blank calendar size should be accurate and show lines. Additional items needed include a watch or a clock in clear sight, pens, and for levels 2 and 3, the client is provided with 2 different color highlighters and scrap paper. Materials should be organized on a table with adequate space and arranged in front of the client as shown on this image and as described on pages 9 through 10 of the manual. Materials needed by the examiner include examiner directions, the WCPA recording form, the after-task interview and rating scale, the optional adult background form, and the optional observation form. These items can be found in the appendices of the manual. The examiner will also need a stopwatch to monitor time during the activity. The examiner can use the examiner directions for all levels as a guide to explain written instructions placed in front of the client. The examiner directions are provided on pages 10 and 11 of the manual, and they can be rephrased if needed. It is helpful to physically point to each of the test items placed in front of the client as they are discussed. Examiner directions can also be downloaded from the website provided at the end of this presentation. The WCPA instruction sheet contains directions and rules to remember. This should remain on the table so the client can refer to this information at any time during the activity. It is very important that instructions are given slowly and clearly so that the client understands the demands of the task, directions, and rules. Ask the client if they have any questions and to restate the directions and rules before beginning. When presenting the instruction sheet to the client, the examiner should note the current time and choose a time estimated to be approximately 7 minutes after the client begins the task. This time should be written directly under the rules to remember on the line that states "Tell me when it is." On the next line, the examiner should indicate the day of the week that should be left free. Depending on the specific appointment list or version used, this day will vary. The designated free day for each version is indicated on page 8 of the manual and at the top of each appointment scoring worksheet. When all of the instructions and rules are clear to the participant, the activity can be started. Begin timing after you say, "Let's begin." The time should be noted on the recording form at 2 points. First, record planning time, which is the time when the client enters the first appointment on the weekly calendar. Then, record the total time, which is the time when the client states that he or she finished or puts down the pen. Optionally, the examiner can record the time when the client enters the second appointment. For explanation of this method, refer to page 12 of the manual. During administration, the examiner observes and records adherence to all 5 rules on the recording form. The total rule score ranges from 0 to 5. In this example, the client only followed 3 out of 5 rules. They forgot to state the time, and they crossed out 1 appointment. Rule number 1 is questions answered. During the activity, the examiner asks the client 3 irrelevant questions, which the client has been instructed not to answer. The question should be asked at times specified on page 11 of the manual. Examples of the questions are listed here. The examiner can also choose substitute questions that are provided on page 12 of the manual. If a client answers questions or engages in conversation, answer them minimally. Do not cue them to return to the task. Observe how long it takes for the client to return to the task. Calendar error management on the WCPA Recording Form refers to how the client handles the errors purposely built into the calendar, such as the Saturday and Sunday reversal, the change in the time format from 15 minutes to half-hour time slots starting at 6, and the time on the calendar ending too early. These observations are not included in the scoring, but the examiner should note the way in which the client handles these difficulties because they provide important qualitative information about how the client manages with these unexpected challenges. If the client asks questions during the activity, the examiner should encourage the client to decide for themselves. The examiner can restate the directions as relevant to the question or point to the instruction sheet at any time, but cannot answer questions. Possible responses could be, try to do the best that you can, or you can decide the best way to handle this. The way that the person goes about the activity, including use of strategies and self-recognition of errors, should be carefully observed and recorded. Strategies that are spontaneously initiated and used by the client during performance are documented on the WCPA Recording Form. Each of the strategies provided on the form is described on page 15 of the manual. The examiner indicates whether the strategy was used occasionally, frequently, or inefficiently by placing a checkmark in the appropriate column of the table. The examiner should also note and record any other strategies that are not listed on the form. Examples of less common strategies not listed on the form that the client may use are provided on this slide and can be found on page 16 of the manual. There is an optional observation worksheet that is used during the assessment to record the order in which a client enters appointments, as well as observations, comments, strategies, or errors specific to each appointment. It is particularly helpful in recording verbal and nonverbal signs of error recognition or attempts at self-correction during the task. This information can then be transferred onto the calendar scoring worksheet and observed strategies form. See page 21 of the manual for more information about use of the observation form. During the activity, self-recognition of errors is recorded on the calendar scoring worksheet in the SR or self-recognition column for each appointment. Appointments entered and accuracy can be scored after the termination of the assessment. Some additional guidelines are as follows. If the client stops writing and appears to be finished but does not say anything, the examiner should ask the client, "Are you done?" If the client performs the activity for more than 30 minutes, the examiner may stop the test. However, in this case, the efficiency score cannot be calculated. If the examiner cannot read the client's handwriting or does not understand abbreviations that were used, the examiner should ask for clarification at the end of the task. The after-task interview and rating scale is conducted immediately after completion of the weekly calendar to assess the client's perceptions regarding the activity and his or her performance. The first question is optional and identifies whether the client routinely uses a weekly calendar. Then, there are 3 open-ended questions. They are designed to explore the person's perceptions about task difficulty and strategy use. The interview should be conducted as a discussion, and responses should be carefully probed in a non-threatening manner. Examples of probes can be found on pages 18 and 19 of the manual. During the after-task interview, additional strategies may be reported. Examples of self-reported strategies include, "I talked to myself," "I paced myself," "I reread the list several times before I started," and so on. Strategies that have not been previously observed are added to the strategy form as indicated here. Question 5 on the after-task interview and rating scale includes 4 statements that are self-rated by the client on a 4-point scale, ranging from agree to disagree. The scale can be completed by the client themselves or as a part of the interview. After question 5, the person can be asked to specifically estimate time and performance accuracy. Responses to these questions are compared with actual performance. Discrepancies provide additional indicators of self-awareness. This concludes the WCPA setup and administration presentation. The next module will provide an opportunity to view and critique administration procedures. Additional resources on functional cognition and the WCPA assessment tool can also be found online at multicontext.net.